today, Richard Wade. Richard is a contributing writer to the Friendly Atheist website and has many other wonderful accomplishments, which I'm sure he will be touching on a little bit, hopefully. And we are so happy to have him here today. Richard.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This here. No, sorry. The room. Okay. I know Eric Felker through our work together at the Santa Clarita Valley Interfaith Council. I'm one of two atheists on the council, and Eric asked me to speak today on a topic from an atheist point of view. I've spoken as a guest atheist at several churches, and what I always say at everyone at the beginning is that I'm not here to change anyone's beliefs about God. I'm here hoping to change beliefs that they probably have about atheists. And I usually have to concentrate on debunking the negative stereotype about atheists that we're selfish nihilists who have no morals and don't care about anything but ourselves. I know that your congregation accepts atheists, and so I don't think I'll have to speak about that very much. By knowing some atheists here, you probably know already that we're not monsters or selfish cynics, but good, decent people like the rest of the congregation. We're just not convinced of supernatural things. So I'd like to talk about how non-believers can have what some might call a spiritual practice. So the term spiritual is very subjective to each person. It can mean completely different things to different people. I tend to avoid using it to describe myself because it can carry so much connotation about supernatural things in some people's minds. Until I find a better term, I'll talk about what I call my practice. The things that I do that are beyond basic survival, things that give my life meaning, purpose, direction, joy, satisfaction, and fulfillment. I think that many of you may share this practice, whether you believe in God or not. But for you to understand what I'm talking about, you have to understand a couple of basic human traits. And here, I think I can show you something here. Oh! I'm sorry. I faked that. And I apologize for playing with your feelings like that. But I needed to demonstrate, rather than just describe, the human trait called empathy. I won't do anything like that anymore. I promise. But I also wanted to show that you possess it. Empathy is the ability to accurately imagine what another person is experiencing physically or emotionally. It is built into us biologically. Some of you actually physically flinched or cringed when you thought I had painfully pinched my hand. It is not a learned reaction. When you were little, your parents didn't say, now, if you ever see someone hurt themselves, you should flinch and make a painful face and then say, ouch. No, your body already knew how to do that. It is instinctive. It's like blinking when something is poked towards your eye. Now this brings me to the second trait I want to talk about, compassion. Until very recently, I, like many people, thought that empathy was essentially the same thing as compassion. But they're not the same. Think of empathy as kind of like one of our senses, like the sense of sight or the sense of hearing. But it's quite possible for people to empathize, to accurately sense someone else's suffering, and yet not care about what they're sensing. Caring is where compassion begins, but it's not sufficient without action. Many people think caring thoughts and feel caring feelings about others, but unless they try to actually do something about what they sense, then their caring has the same actual effect as not caring at all. While atheists tend to think a lot and try to think carefully, they're also very pragmatic. They know that thoughts and feelings have no weight or significance unless they're acted upon. So empathy is important, but not sufficient. And caring and compassion are important, but not sufficient. Actions are what make all of that meaningful and real. This is why I admire this particular congregation, because you have so many ways that you outreach, that you put your empathy and compassion into practice. A Christian friend of mine once asked me that since as an atheist I don't pray, what do I say at a funeral when others are telling the grief-stricken family members that they'll pray for them? I offer to do errands for them. Get things at the market for them, take their car to the mechanic, make phone calls for them, cook some meals for them, anything to somehow lighten the load of their daily tasks that are now so much heavier because they're overwhelmed with grief. I offer simple but needed practical favors. I offer action. We, all of us, believers and non-believers, are what we do, not what we think or believe. It is our real-world actions that make us real in the world. Now, I'll tell you a story about a real person who put his empathy and his compassion to work with real action. At the entrance to Sydney Harbour, Australia, there's a high, rugged, sheer cliff called the Gap. To fall from that cliff is certain and instant death. Since the 1800s, it has been a very popular place for people who want to commit suicide. And for more than 50 years, a man named Don Ritchie lived in a house just across the road from the edge. He would keep an eye on people who came up the road to stand at the edge. And if he sensed something was wrong, he'd go out to meet them. He saved hundreds of lives, hundreds of people contemplating suicide by striking up a friendly conversation with them and inviting them into his house for a cup of tea. He died in 2012 at the age of 86. Now, when I first read this story, I was reminded of a famous and wonderful poem by Sam Walter Foss, The House by the Side of the Road, and I'd like to read it to you. There are hermit souls that live withdrawn in the peace of their self-content. There are souls like stars that dwell apart in a fellowless firmament. There are pioneer souls that blaze their paths where highways never ran. But let me live by the side of the road and be a friend to man. Let me live in a house by the side of the road where the race of men go by, the men who are good and the men who are bad, as good and as bad as I. I would not sit in the scorner's seat or hurl the cynic's ban. Let me live in a house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. I see from my house by the side of the road, by the side of the highway of life, the men who press with the ardor of hope, the men who are faint with the strife. But I turn not away from their smiles nor their tears, both parts of an infinite plan. Let me live in my house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. I know there are brook-gladdened meadows ahead and mountains of wearisome height, that the road passes on through the long afternoon and stretches away to the night. But still I rejoice when the travelers rejoice, and weep with the strangers that moan, nor live in my house by the side of the road like a man who dwells alone. Let me live in my house by the side of the road where the race of men go by. They are good, they are bad, they are weak, they are strong, wise, foolish. So am I. Then why would I sit in the scorner's seat or hurl the cynic's ban? Let me live in my house by the side of the road and be a friend to man. Now, Mr. Don Ritchie lived in Australia in a house at what many people thought was the end of their road. And by being a friend to them, he helped them find their way further down their road. The poem says that our smiles and our tears are part of an infinite plan. But as an atheist, I don't have to believe in an infinite plan for me to live by the side of the road and be a friend to man. My plan is no more than 100 years long, and I'm already about 2/3 through it. Although none of my experiences are as beautiful or dramatic as Mr. Ritchie's, in my work as a psychotherapist, I have also saved several lives. I know because years later, people have tracked me down and told me so. I've helped to make many more lives at least less miserable. And even though I have retired from that particular work, I intend to continue to take actions that benefit others any way I can, large or small, for as long as I can draw breath. That is my practice. Now, since the meaning of the original Latin word spiritus meant breath, you could call it a spiritual practice, since I'll be trying to practice it as long as I'm breathing. Why do I do this? Because I can't not do it. It seems to be part of my nature as much as blinking when something is poked toward my eye. I cannot not do it. Mr. Ritchie said that he couldn't simply sit there and watch them jump. He had to help if he could. Some people have this trait strongly, others not so strongly. And you can argue endlessly about where it comes from. But that's not nearly as important as doing it. At least don't discourage it in yourself or others. And maybe try to encourage it in yourself and others. Now, you don't have to save any lives or have professional skills to be a friend to man. All you have to do is to be interested where you might have shown no interest, be kind where you might have been unkind, patient where you might have been impatient, and show caring where you might have been aloof. And then take some kind of action based on that interest, that kindness, that patience, and that caring. By your simple daily interactions, your influence on other people, for good or ill, goes on beyond you. And it continues on beyond them. If you show kindness and patience with people, they will be just a little more capable of showing kindness and patience to others. And those, in turn, will be just a little more capable as well. Just a couple of steps out, your influence will probably be too small to observe. But as subtle as it is, there's no reason to think that it ever completely stops, that it ever reaches zero. It is arguable that your influence, positive or negative, will imperceptibly go on and on. So if you want to be part of something infinite, you already are. So make sure that your interactions are empathetic and compassionate, so that that will be your influence, your legacy that goes beyond the limited space and time that you get to occupy. Thank you very much.